Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be checking back in on Virginia and the gubernatorial election that is set to occur there in November. It's going to be a really interesting race, and we've haven't really had the opportunity to talk about it in a little over a month or a month and a half. So now is a better time than ever to look at Virginia. Just to kind of get you all back into the swing of things, this is uh, one of our favorite off-year elections on this channel because it's in a state that's, been competitive the past few years. Uh, Republicans had a really successful 2021 here. We're going to see if they can hold on to that in 2025, but it's going to be difficult for a number of reasons, which we'll be getting into. Before we do that, some context. Winsome Sears, who is currently, as you can see, the lieutenant governor of Virginia. Like I said, Republicans had a really good 2021. She was part of that against Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat, who is a congresswoman from the central part of the state. She is from this region right here, kind of the north central region, suburbs. Flipped a seat in 2018. It's been blue ever since. So these are both strong candidates, and Virginia is going to be interesting. Now, let's just get right into the fact that there are some. This is a local race, but there are some broader national implications to speak of, right? Typically in Virginia, the party out of power at the presidential level has won the governorship. And you can go back to the 2000s to see this. I'm actually going to just scroll through. Wikipedia has a nice feature. You can kind of take a look at this. But um, as you can see, going back to the 1990s, the only election in which the party in power in the White House won the governorship was in 2013. But if you start in the 1990s, Jim Gilmore, who actually ran for president at one point, Bill Clinton was president. He won this election. But Democrats, the second George W. Bush came into office, Mark Warner, who's now a senator, he won. Tim Kaine, who's now the other senator, he won. And then Barack Obama wins. Virginia goes right back to the Republicans. Bob McDonnell wins pretty decisively. Now, 2013 is our exception. The Democrats did win it back with Terry McAuliffe, who beat Ken Cuccinelli in this race very narrowly, though. Again, as you can see, it was by a little over 50,000 votes. And that's not to mention the fact that the Libertarian candidate got well over 140,000 votes. So, again, obviously not to take away from this victory for Democrats, but this was the closest, or this was an incredibly close gubernatorial election. It was similar to 2021, but there's a Libertarian in this race that really made a lot of Republicans upset when it was all said and done. But you go to 2017, Democrats won a pretty solid victory here. Donald Trump was president. Ralph Northam won by well over 200,000 votes. But in 2021, despite the fact that Virginia by this point had been on a blue trend since 2012, since 2008, really, Republicans win it right back. This was a pretty, given the context of this, Virginia, it was pretty crazy to see Republicans flip Virginia right back. And overall, just a very, very interesting result, given that Terry McAuliffe was he'd won an election here in 2013 when the state was redder, but as you can see, Virginia does not like the party in power. They vote for Glenn Youngkin. So it's now 2025, and if these trends are to be realized, it's likely you'd bet on Abigail Spanberger to win. Trump is a Republican. He's the president. He's not super popular right now. He's not as, his approval ratings are higher than they were at this time in his first term, and that seems to be stabilizing. But he's still not very popular in Virginia, and we do know that this trend has occurred under popular presidents and unpopular presidents, right? Barack Obama in 2001 and 2000, or Barack Obama in 2009 and George W. Bush in 2001 both had pretty good approval numbers. Didn't stop the parties that they were part of from losing these elections in Virginia. So that's the first thing I want to point out. It sticks out to you right away, and it's really interesting. And it's really kind of a reflection of the broader dynamics that tend to surround these off-year elections. And they also surround midterm elections, which is that the party out of power has the turnout advantage. They have usually the persuasion advantage because people, as of late, have been pretty upset with the party in power. And the best way to punish the person you're mad at is to vote against their party. And we saw that in 2021, where I thought this is actually a fascinating case study of how Democrats really got punished, right? Going back to, the last kind of political era. The COVID lockdowns are starting to ease. A lot of voters are mad at Democrats because of that. A lot of voters are mad at Democrats regarding education issues. Joe Biden was, really tanking after the Afghanistan withdrawal. That resulted in Republicans being able to find lightning in a bottle, and Glenn Youngkin won this race. So that goes to show being the party out of power can really be an asset in these elections. So With that being said, let's now talk about a little bit of the polling data. And just to walk through this, it's still only May, which is why we don't have a ton of great polling, but we've gotten some good insights. Now, right away, I think that the two most important polls to look at are the polls, or there's actually three, from Signal, from Pantheon, and from Roanoke. Roanoke is a pretty good pollster. We'll start with them. I didn't love this poll. They didn't really push their undecideds. They had a relatively high margin of error, right? But what we did see was that they found Abigail Spanberger had a pretty big advantage. She was at 43%, which isn't too great, but she was still a full 17% ahead of Winsome Sears. And that to me is an indication that maybe Sears is a little weaker among the GOP base than we originally thought, right? And a lot of people said that about Glenn Youngkin in 2021 because the Virginia Republican Party canceled their primary and they held a convention instead and nominated Glenn Youngkin. But Youngkin ended up winning, so I'm not so sure if that's the cause. More likely, I think it's May. I think people are tuned out. Generally speaking, the average voter doesn't have super strong opinions about governor elections within their state off year 6 months before it happens. So I think that's part of it. Uh, certainly Winsome Sears is guaranteed to get more than 26% of the vote, barring something crazy happening. So that's the thing I want to say about Roanoke. Even though I think this is a fairly reputable pollster, I wish they would have done more of a push on their undecideds, and I wish that they would have conducted this poll in a manner that gave us just a smaller portion of these. So those are my thoughts on that. But we did get some more precise polling, right? Signal, which is the Republican poll, they only got 14% undecided. This was actually back at the end of February. But what they found was this is probably the best news for Spanberger in these polls that we've found so far. Signal had her up 46-40 over Sears, and this is a Republican pollster, right? We know that, generally publicly released Democratic internal polls or Republican internal polls tend to be pretty favorable to the party that they're commissioning for. And Signal, that the fact that they're showing Sears down by 6, not great for her. Of course, Spanberger's only at 46%. She's going to need more than that to win, certainly. And she's going to need a lot more than that to have a convincing mandate to govern Virginia. But what I will say at this point is that if it's February and you're down by 6 in your own internal polling, not a great place to be in to start out the horse race. But we do have some more recent polls. Earlier in this month, we got Pantheon Insight working with Harris X. They did 1,000 likely voters. That's a good screen to have, right? And what they found was that when they didn't push undecideds, they had Spanberger up by 3. When they pushed, she was up by 4. And this is, I think, reasonable. Now, I do not think a Spanberger plus 4 result would be all that great for Democrats, which I'll get into in a second here. But this is plausible, right? Virginia voted for Harris by 6. It voted for Youngkin by 2 in 2021. So a victory of 4% for Spanberger could certainly be in the cards. But I want to move on to talk about why I think that wouldn't actually be all that great. Now, to go to the 2024 election results, we can see Kamala Harris won by just under 6%. And this was, she got the job done here, but this was by no means a particularly impressive result, at least given the circumstances, right? Joe Biden in 2020 won Virginia by 10 points. And so Virginia swung 4% to the right between 2020 and 2024. Granted, the country as a whole swung well over 6%, nearly 7% really, around 6% actually to the right. So Virginia, relative to the country, it actually trended left a little bit. But overall, this I don't think was a particularly impressive performance from Harris. And I don't think anyone would dispute that. It wasn't a disaster. I don't think it was as bad as her performances in Arizona or in New Jersey. I also don't think that it was entirely that those performances were her fault, right? But still not a great result. And Virginia is a state that has been trending to the consensus, especially prior to 2021 and 2022, was that Virginia was trending to the left. Democratic margins were expanding here. They were winning governorships. They were winning the state legislature. They had a good 2023 here even. But with Youngkin winning in 2021 and then Trump doing actually quite well here in 2024, a little concerning for Democrats. So Spanberger, I think for this to be a slam dunk for her, I think she has to win by 7 or 8. And that might seem lofty, but again, it's still less than the amount that Joe Biden won by. That's still less than the amount that Ralph Northam won by in 2017 when he was the Democrat who won the gubernatorial race during Trump's first term. So I don't think that's that hard, that's that high of a bar to set. So a 4-point victory for Abigail Spanberger, again, a win's a win, but in terms of national implications, to underperform Kamala Harris, despite the fact that it's in your environment, despite the fact that Virginia is supposed to be a state that's still fundamentally left trending, and despite the fact that Donald Trump is not supposed to be very popular in the country right now, right? If given those circumstances, Democrats are only winning by 4% in Virginia, uh, that is either a pretty chilling or it's a pretty bad omen for them nationally, or it's a sign that within Virginia, voters are still very unhappy with them. They're still not willing to trust them to govern the way they were not in 2021. And so that is what brings me to my final point here. And it's kind of where I'm going to talk about predicting this race, because I've given the context, I've kind of given my opinions on what this means and what certain results would mean. Again, I think an 8-point victory is kind of the bar here, maybe 7.5-point victory for Spanberger. But clearly, the center of gravity is, and the good news for Democrats is, even though I think I'm being a little bearish on them in this video, is that they're favored to win this race. They are more likely than not to win back the governorship of Virginia, and that's a big deal. Virginia is a big state. It's certainly got a lot of political influence, right? You also have a number of key House seats here. You got state legislative elections and other row offices that are up in 2025. It's going to be a big year, right? That's all well and good. And Democrats, any victory here would be good for them, and it would be important for them, and it would be momentum. But at the end of the day, they're favored to win this race. And I would argue that that Spanberger, I think, knows this. I think Democrats know this, and I think that's why their expectations should be high. But what I'm getting at here is that Virginia is not likely to buck the trend that we've seen from it, from this Commonwealth, where they do vote against the incumbent party. I don't think they're likely to buck that trend. What's interesting to watch for, to me, and I'll show this to you right now, is how the suburbs vote. Because Democrats in 2024, they did okay in the suburbs. They held on reasonably well with white voters, but they lost ground in the suburbs, especially with Asian, Black, and Hispanic voters. Particularly, I think Black turnout was down, so I don't want to say they lost too much ground, but certainly Black turnout was down. But Democrats, especially Northern Virginia, did not do well with Hispanic voters. They did not do well with Asian voters. And Black turnout, like I said, was down a bit. And so in general, that creates a pretty concerning trend where Democrats, they've relied on a very diverse coalition of voters to help swing the suburbs, because the suburbs have gotten more diverse over the past few decades. And when that coalition's not showing up for you, it's going to be pretty. It's an understatement to argue that it would be a big problem. So let's just briefly compare some results here. Glenn Youngkin and Terry McAuliffe, Fairfax County. Terry McAuliffe, this is a deep blue county nowadays. It used to be competitive. I think George W. Bush won it back in 2000. But anyways, it voted for McAuliffe. He got 65% here. If you go to Kamala Harris in 2024, this was a very bad result for her. She won Fairfax County with 66% of the vote, and that's despite the fact she did a whole 6% better than McAuliffe statewide. So that shows even between 2021 and 2024, Democrats lost some ground, especially likely among Hispanic and Asian voters. Loudoun County, this is an interesting one. Loudoun County voted for Kamala Harris. She got 57% here. The drop-off is a bit bigger. McAuliffe only won Loudoun by 11, but Loudoun, again, it's a bit whiter. It's a bit more. I would say, I don't want to say exurban, but it's less urban than Fairfax. And Kamala Harris still didn't do all that well here, right? Joe Biden won this county by margins in the 20s, and Harris only won it by 17. So I would watch Fairfax and Loudoun. They're a bit different, but if I'm a Democrat, I would want Abigail Spanberger to hit a 20-point victory in Loudoun, clear that pretty easily, and I'd like her to get up to the high 60s, maybe low 70s in Fairfax. And that's ambitious. I understand that, right? But given the environment, given the fact that Democrats have also turned out in special elections and off-year elections more than Republicans in recent years, it's doable. And so the question for Winsome Sears becomes, how do you win? Because I've made it clear that I think Spanberger, I think this is her race to lose. And I think that when you look at the suburbs, when you look at how Kamala Harris did in 2024, there's a lot of room to be gained for Spanberger. So how does Winsome Sears win? Well, I think, first of all, a lot of it's out of her control because you do have the national factors at play, which I've discussed pretty extensively. But there's a pretty simple path here. You go and you try to recreate the Youngkin coalition. That's easier said than done. Youngkin, he had a lot of wind at his back, and he was able to do very well in persuasion in these suburbs. But what I think Sears has to work kind of for her is that Youngkin right now is actually quite popular in Virginia. Obviously, Donald Trump is not popular. Obviously, I don't think the Republican brand is very strong here because Kamala Harris still won Virginia despite everything else, and she won it by 6%, so it wasn't even like super close. But Youngkin is popular. Virginians are broadly pretty content with their governor. So what you need from Sears is to be able to run on the Youngkin message. I think she has to not only run back that playbook and use that kind of same technique, but she has to run with Youngkin. She has to say, if you want another 4 years of Glenn Youngkin, you should vote for me, right? It's that kind of message that typically works, or maybe not works, but typically helps candidates, tying themselves to popular local governance. And that's, by the way, the reverse of that. When you tie your opponent or when you get tied to unpopular local governance, that results in voters who typically do not vote for you voting for you, or people who typically vote against you, or people who typically vote for you voting against you, excuse me. And so that is the path that I think Sears has. And I think that if she's able to pull that off, she'll do quite well in Loudoun County. She'll do quite well in Fairfax County. She'll do quite well in Northern Virginia. But the other issue here is that there are some suburbs in the Virginia Beach, Norfolk kind of, it's also Chesapeake and Newport News kind of got a collection of cities down here. These suburbs have been trending left as well, right? Look at Virginia Beach, look at Norfolk, look at Chesapeake. Chesapeake and Virginia Beach were on 4 or 3 point margin victories. Norfolk was obviously pretty deep blue. If you compare that to 2021, there are actually some flips here. Terry McAuliffe lost Chesapeake. He lost Virginia Beach. So these counties have been trending left more substantially than the Northern Virginia counties in the past few years, right? Kamala Harris did better than Terry McAuliffe. I mean, just take a look. McAuliffe lost Virginia Beach by 8%. Harris won it by 3%. So we saw pretty substantial swings in these counties that we did not really see to the same extent in Northern Virginia. So the bigger problem for Sears is that even if she can hold the line here, she's going to have to really, really work to run back the clock in Virginia Beach and in Chesapeake and kind of in this, in the Hampton Roads metro area, right? There's a lot of names for it because there's so many cities down here, but right, I think it's pretty clear what she has to do. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Like I've said, this is Spanberger's race to lose. But at this point, the question to me becomes, if there is a path for Sears, what is it? Again, you have to tie yourself to Youngkin. You have to stop the bleeding here, and you have to find a way to turn back the clock down in Virginia Beach, right? Maybe it's on top of using Youngkin to resonate with maybe moderate Democrats. It's also making or ensuring that Republican turnout stays high. This is a problem Republicans have had in recent years. They haven't been able to get turnout up in special elections. It's been a problem for them. Democrats have been outvoting them in these elections, even if Republicans have gotten better at turning out in general elections. So Sears is going to have to also rally the troops from her home base. And that's not only in Virginia Beach, it's also in the rural part of Virginia too. So stay tuned. I'll continue to cover this race, but those are my thoughts on it for now. So again, I'm always open to new ideas. It's an odd year, so we've got a lot of time and room for content. So let me know what you want to see, and I'll do my best to get on it. I'll see you guys next time.